Greetings, dear listeners of this channel. I am immensely grateful to you for choosing me. Please forgive my mistakes. I truly do my best and appreciate your feedback. Please stay tuned to this channel and enjoy your time in a world where the mind is free. I woke up in the drop pod and it was already burning. Not metaphorically, it was literally on fire, the hull melting, and I could see the metal dripping past the viewport in red beads. Carnage's atmosphere was eating our armor like acid on sugar, and I knew we were flying into hell long before we hit the ground. The pod shook so violently my teeth rattled, and the air was filled with the wail of sirens and the crackle of overloaded systems. 23 men from my platoon were strapped in beside me, all silent, with only Junior Lieutenant Rybakov mumbling under his breath, maybe a prayer, maybe cursing. I gripped my rifle and looked out the viewport. Below, a jungle spread out, but not an earth one. It was black and purple, with trees as tall as our skyscrapers, all wrapped in a toxic fog that glowed with a sickly, corpse-green light. Then, the retro thrusters fired, pinning me to my seat, and the pod slammed into the ground with a bang so loud I briefly lost consciousness. When the hatch blew open, the first thing I felt was the smell. Picture a mix of rotting meat, sulfuric acid, and something sickly sweet that instantly made you want to vomit. The air was thick, humid, and burned my lungs with every breath. My gas mask filters immediately began to beep, signaling critical toxin levels. We scrambled out of the pod. Some fell, some tripped over roots as thick as my leg, and instantly realized Carnage hadn't been waiting. The surrounding trees were moving, even though there was no wind. Vines, thick, covered in thorns and some kind of slime, crawled slowly across the ground like living snakes. Private Kovalyov didn't get far enough from the pod and stepped on one such vine. It instantly wrapped around his leg, the thorns digging through his armor, and the guy screamed so loud my blood ran cold. We started hacking at the thing with our knives, shooting it, but it only squeezed tighter, and when we finally tore it off, Kovalyov's leg was eaten down to the bone by some acid the damn plant excreted. The planet started killing us before we saw a single enemy. 10 minutes after the landing, I had lost 3 men. Kovalyov was bleeding out and delirious from toxins. Corporal Makarov inhaled a cloud of spores from a burst, car-sized fungus, and began to suffocate. His face swelled up, his eyes bloodshot, and he died, writhing on the ground, while we frantically searched our medical kits for an antidote. And Sergeant Belikov simply vanished. We heard a cry, turned around, and in his place was only his rifle lying there and a drag mark in the mud heading into the thicket. I sent 2 men after him, but they returned minutes later, pale, and said they only found his helmet and a piece of body armor. Everything else was a bloody mess. Something huge had dragged him into the jungle in a matter of seconds. The gravity here was wrong too. It would suddenly get heavier, and you'd drop to your knees under the weight of your own armor, then weaken, and you'd jump 3 meters high, losing all orientation. We trudged through this nightmare, trying to figure out where north was, where the enemy was, where anything familiar was, but everything around us was alien and hostile. By the evening of the first day, I realized Carnage wasn't a planet. It was a living organism trying to digest us. Out of the 23 men in my platoon, only 14 were left, and we hadn't fired a single shot against the coalition. We dug a defensive position among the roots of a giant tree, set up a perimeter, but we knew it was an illusion of safety. At night, the jungle came alive. We heard roars, hissing, and the snap of breaking trees somewhere in the distance. Over the radio, we were informed that out of the 30 drop pods from our battalion, only 18 had made contact. The rest had either burned up during atmospheric entry or landed in zones where no one survived. And 50 kilometers from here, the Kaltorians of the coalition had landed, reptilian bastards who were after the same carnadite we were. The commander on the line said the race was on. Whoever secured the central deposit first controlled the planet. I looked at my exhausted, wounded fighters and thought, what kind of race is this, for God's sake? when we might not even make it to morning. On the third night on Carnage, I saw for the first time what it meant to fight on three fronts simultaneously. We had dug in on a hill from which we were supposed to control the approaches to the canyon leading to the Carnadite deposits. Intelligence reported that the Kaltorians were moving toward us from the north, and we prepared for battle, set up mines, zeroed our weapons, and dug trenches in the rocky soil. But when darkness fell, something else emerged from the jungle. First, we heard a roar, low, vibrating, making the ground tremble beneath our feet. Then, the trees at the edge of the clearing cracked and splintered, and a creature the size of our light tank stumbled out. 6 legs covered in chitinous armor, a maw full of teeth as long as my arm, and eyes, black, dead, like a shark's. It moved faster than something that huge had any right to move. We opened fire, and I watched the bullets ricochet off its hide. A grenade launcher hit its flank, the explosion tearing away a piece of armor, but the beast didn't even slow down. It rushed into our trench and grabbed Private Orlov, tearing him in half with a single snap of its jaws. We killed that creature. We used almost all our ammunition, 4 anti-tank mines, and 2 flamethrowers on it. But it wasn't alone. As we finished off the first predator, 3 more crawled out of the darkness, followed by a swarm of dog-sized flying things with acid-secreting stingers. They covered Private Zaitsev, and in seconds, all that was left of him was a pile of smoking bones and melted armor. I screamed commands, fired in bursts and threw grenades, but I knew we were losing. And then the shooting started from the north, tracer rounds, plasma discharges, characteristic of Kaltorian weaponry. They had run into the same wave of predators and were now fighting near us, about 200 meters away. I saw one of their shock troopers, a 2-meter-tall reptile in power armor, running from a pack of those flying creatures, firing on the move. He was torn to shreds 10 meters from our position. We didn't help him. He wouldn't have helped us. But in that moment, I understood. Carnage was fighting both of us, and it didn't care who we were. By dawn, we had lost half the platoon, the Kaltorians had fallen back a kilometer, and the jungle around our position was littered with bodies, ours, theirs, and those monsters. But the worst began in the afternoon, when we checked on the wounded. Corporal Gromov, a namesake, no relation, had a scratch from one of the predators, a shallow one. We treated the wound and bandaged it. 2 hours later, he started complaining about itching. An hour after that, the skin around the wound was covered in grayish-green patches, like mold. By evening, he was delirious, his temperature spiking, and threads started emerging from the wound, thin, white, like fungal mycelium. The medic said it was a fungal infection, that Gromov had picked up spores from the creature's claws. We isolated him, pumped him with everything we had in the kits, antibiotics, antifungals, stimulants. But nothing worked. On the third day, Gromov stopped being human. He stood up, his eyes white and pupilless, his skin cracked, and mushrooms were growing from the fissures. He walked toward us, slowly, silently, and I knew that wasn't Gromov anymore. I shot him in the head myself and ordered the body burned. It wasn't the last case. Command finally realized the reality 2 weeks later, when losses from the planet exceeded combat casualties by 3 times. Over encrypted communication, we were told the Kaltorians were offering a truce. Their commander, Some Zarket, stated that war on Carnage was irrational, that both sides should unite against the common enemy or abandon the planet. Our command refused. Admiral Zhao, the hard-ass son of a bitch who planned the whole operation, transmitted one phrase to all units. There will be no retreat. The Carnadite is needed at any cost, and if we leave, we will lose the galactic war. I listened to this on the radio, sitting in a blast crater surrounded by corpses, half mine, half Kaltorian, and the rest unrecognizable because Carnage had turned them into a pulp. And I thought, maybe the Kaltorians are right. Maybe we are all just lunatics who came here to die on this damn planet. But I kept fighting because there was no other choice. Carnage let no one leave alive, and the only way to survive was to move forward toward that damn Carnadite, through the jungle, the predators, the spores, and the Kaltorians. A three-front war. And we were losing on all three. In the 5th week of the war, the Kaltorians reached out again, and this time their proposal was heard by everyone. They broadcast it on an open frequency so every soldier on both sides understood what was happening. I was sitting in a dugout, fixing a torn load-bearing vest strap, when the radio crackled and a voice came through, low, with a distinct sibilant accent that betrayed a Kaltorian. Their commander, Zarket, spoke slowly, choosing his words in our language, and I could hear the troops around me fall silent, listening. He said that in a month of war, both sides had lost more troops to Carnage than to each other, that the planet was killing faster than any weapon, and that continuing the slaughter meant condemning both armies to complete annihilation. Zarket offered a temporary truce. Divide the territory, jointly resist the planetary threats, split the development of the Carnadite deposits 50-50, and leave this world alive. He spoke of logic, species survival, and how the war here was meaningless. I finished fixing my strap and thought the reptile was right. We would all die on this planet long before we ever saw a gram of Carnadite. Admiral Zhao's answer came 10 minutes later, and it was a slap to all Kaltorian logic. Zhao didn't bother with diplomacy. He broadcast his response on the same open frequency, and his voice, hard and icy, sounded so harsh that it sent shivers down my spine. He said that humanity had fought in places where survival was impossible, that we had survived the trenches of Verdun, where mud and gas killed faster than bullets, that we stormed Stalingrad, where every house was a tomb, and took Iwo Jima, where every meter of ground cost blood. Zhao stated that Carnage was just another Stalingrad, another meat grinder, and if the Kaltorians weren't ready to pay the price for victory, they had already lost. He refused the truce. He ordered all units to continue the offensive, seize territory, destroy the enemy, and ignore the casualties. I listened and couldn't believe it. We were dying by the thousands every day, and command demanded more blood. But something inside me responded to those words. Maybe it was madness, maybe stubbornness. But I realized we wouldn't retreat, even if Carnage devoured all of us. The Kaltorians hadn't expected such a response, and it was evident in how they fought afterward. 2 days after the truce refusal, we clashed with their reconnaissance group in a swampy lowland where the mud reached our waists and the air was so toxic that we had to change gas mask filters every half hour. We opened fire, they returned it, and a firefight erupted, a typical messy one, devoid of tactics, because tactics didn't work in this swamp. I saw one of the Kaltorians, wounded in the leg, trying to crawl back to his comrades, but getting stuck in the mud. His squad tried to pull him out, but then something surged out of the mire, tentacles covered in suction cups the size of dinner plates, and dragged the Kaltorian down in seconds. His scream cut off as he disappeared under the water. We finished off the rest, but I saw their faces. They were in shock, not because we were killing them, but because we had even come here, to this swamp where survival was impossible. One of the prisoners we took alive looked at me, and his eyes held not fear, but incomprehension. He asked, through a translator, why we were doing this, why we were dying for a planet that hated us. I didn't answer because I didn't know myself, but the longer the war went on, the more I understood the difference between us and them. The Kaltorians fought rationally. They calculated losses, assessed risks, and retreated when the situation became unfavorable. They were good soldiers, disciplined, and technically proficient. But they weren't stubborn. When their commander ordered a retreat, they retreated. When logic dictated that a position couldn't be held, they abandoned it. We, on the other hand, held on until the very end. I saw my squad defend a ridge for 3 days without water or ammunition, fighting with rocks and knives after the bullets ran out. I saw a wounded Sidorov with a severed arm drag a machine gun to his position and keep firing until he died of blood loss. The Kaltorians considered us insane, and they were right. But that madness worked. We took positions they deemed impregnable, went where they dared not go, and survived where they gave up. Zarket sent one more message a week later, and his voice held not contempt, but something else: fear mixed with respect. He said that humans do not fight like rational beings, that we do not understand the value of life, and that war with us is a war against a force of nature, blind and merciless. He was right. We won't stop. Carnage won't stop us. And they realized it too late. By the third week of the war, we had ceased to be the men who flew to Carnage. The planet was changing us, breaking us down, and rebuilding us to suit itself. Those who couldn't adapt simply died. The first step was blood. Our medic, Senior Sergeant Volkov, a former biochemist who ended up in the army after his lab on Mars was bombed, noticed a strange thing. The soldiers wounded by local predators who survived no longer reacted to Carnage's toxins as severely. Their lungs adapted, their skin didn't ulcerate from contact with plants, and spores didn't cause suffocation. Volkov hypothesized that the predator's blood contained something like antibodies, an immune response to the local biochemistry. He took blood from a killed creature, the same six-legged one that tore Orlov apart, filtered it, diluted it with saline from our kits, and offered me to try it first. I looked at the syringe of dark red liquid and thought it was madness. Then I looked at my men. Half were coughing blood from toxins, 3 had festering wounds, and 2 were delirious from spores. I injected myself with the dose. I shook for an hour. My temperature spiked to 40, 104°. I threw up bile and hallucinated. But then it got easier. The air stopped burning my lungs. I could breathe without a gas mask for about 15 minutes with no consequences. Within a week, half the survivors in the battalion were injecting predator blood like addicts. We hunted these creatures not just for defense, but for their blood. It became currency, a survival resource. Volkov refined the process, learned to isolate the necessary compounds, and created a concentrate. The side effects were gruesome. Some soldiers' eye color changed, becoming yellow or green, their skin thickened, developing scales like reptiles. Private Mikheyev, after his 5th injection, could see in the dark like a cat, but lost the ability to distinguish red and blue. Corporal Krylov could smell things 100 meters away, but was nauseated by any human food. He ate only the raw meat of local animals. Command initially tried to ban the practice, calling us mutants, threatening a tribunal. But when statistics showed that units using the blood survived 3 times more often, the bans were lifted. We were permitted to adapt at any cost. The Kaltorians tried to replicate our experiment. We found their corpses with makeshift syringes, but their biology couldn't handle it. The blood of Carnage killed them in hours. Their bodies rejected the foreign proteins, but we drank it and grew stronger. But the blood was only the beginning. The engineer corps, the guys who were supposed to build fortifications and fix equipment, started experimenting with local flora. Captain Sobolev, a burly Siberian with golden hands, noticed that some Carnage fungi grew on metal, forming a symbiosis. They didn't destroy it but strengthened it, creating an additional layer similar to armor. He took the spores of one such fungus, grew a culture on a plate of our armor, and created a material that was lighter than steel but twice as tear-resistant. The problem was that the fungus was alive. It required nourishment and moisture, and if the host died, the fungus began to devour the corpse. But we didn't care. Sobolev created a technology to apply the fungal armor to body vests, helmets, even vehicles. I remember the first time I put on such a vest. It was warm, slightly pulsed as if breathing, and covered in grayish-green growths from which thin threads of mycelium stuck out. It looked repulsive and smelled of decay, but when a Kaltorian plasma round hit my chest, I survived. The fungus took the impact, charred, but regenerated overnight, feeding on my sweat and dead skin cells. We became walking symbionts with the planet, and it was disgusting and beautiful at the same time. And the scouts went even further. They began using the planet itself as a weapon. Lieutenant Osipov, the commander of our recon group, a guy with icy eyes and nerves of steel, was the first to realize that Carnage's predators hunted using pheromones, chemical traces left by prey. He killed one of the flying creatures, extracted the pheromone-producing glands, and learned to synthesize an analog in the field. Then, he smeared the stuff all over a Kaltorian bunker. That night, a pack of 20 predators, the same six-legged, tank-sized ones, came out for them. The Kaltorians fought for an hour, spent all their ammo, and called for reinforcements. But by dawn, all that remained of their company were corpses and craters. We didn't even fire a shot. We just watched through binoculars as Carnage did our work. After that, reconnaissance began using pheromones constantly, smeared on enemy routes, contaminating their water, spraying it from drones over their positions. The Kaltorians were taking casualties not from us, but from the planet, which we had learned to direct against them. Zarket transmitted a desperate message to his command. We intercepted it. He said that humans were not fighting fairly, that we had turned into a part of Carnage, and that their soldiers were afraid not of us, but of what we were becoming. He was right. We adapted through suffering, mutation, and symbiosis, and that gave us an advantage they didn't have. We became the children of Carnage, and the planet was beginning to accept us. Bloody Canyon earned its name on the second day of the battle, when the river at its bottom turned red with the blood of both sides. The gorge stretched for 20 kilometers, and the only bridge across the chasm was the key to the entire central Carnadite deposit. Whoever controlled the bridge controlled the path to victory. Command threw 3 divisions at it, the Kaltorians the same. The artillery barrage started at dawn, and I'd never seen anything like it. The sky turned into pure fire, the ground shook so violently you couldn't stand, and the air hummed with explosions. Shells landed every 2 seconds, raising columns of mud, rock, and bodies. I led the remnants of my platoon, 23 men half-wounded, all exhausted, toward the bridge, picking our way through utter chaos. A truck blew up on a mine to my left. A Kaltorian plasma grenade vaporized a whole squad of ours to my right. We reached the bridge by noon, and I saw that holding it was suicide. The bridge was narrow, about 50 meters long, suspended over a 300-meter deep abyss, and both sides wanted it so badly they were willing to bury it in corpses. The battalion commander, Major Krechetov, ordered me to hold the west end of the bridge at all costs. I looked at my men and knew we would all die here. The first Kaltorian assault began an hour later. They came in a wave, 100 shock troopers in heavy power armor, armed with plasma rifles and grenade launchers, covered by their own artillery fire. We dug in on our side of the bridge, set up 2 machine guns, scattered mines, and piled up a barricade of wrecked equipment. I gave the order to open fire when they stepped onto the bridge, and the slaughter began. The machine guns mowed them down, mines exploded beneath their feet, grenades ripped open their armor, but they kept coming. I fired until my rifle barrel was glowing hot, until the magazine was empty, then grabbed the next one and kept going. The Kaltorians reached the middle of the bridge, but we stopped them. Corpses piled up, blood flowed between the deck planks, dripping into the abyss. We repelled the first wave, then the second, then the third. By evening, we were out of ammo for 1 machine gun, half the platoon was wounded, and the Kaltorians wouldn't stop. They changed tactics, sending assault teams from the flanks, trying to bypass the bridge along the cliffs, dropping firebombs on us from drones. We held on because there was no other choice. On the second night, the Reapers started. These were not the predators we had seen before. This was something new, night hunters drawn by the smell of blood. They climbed out of the abyss, scrambling up the canyon walls on dozens of limbs, and they were a legion. The Reapers were man-sized but lightning fast, with claws that sliced through armor and jaws capable of snapping bone. They attacked everyone, us, the Kaltorians, indiscriminately. I saw a Reaper knock 2 Kaltorian shock troopers off the bridge, then jump onto our Zaitsev and tear his throat out in a second. We fired in all directions, at the Kaltorians from the front, at the Reapers from the flanks, and we were critically running out of ammunition. I ordered them to take captured weapons. Kaltorian plasma rifles were heavy and awkward, but they fired. Engineer Sobolev rigged explosives from local plants, those that produced flammable gas, stuffing them into shell casings, adding detonators from grenades. We threw these bombs onto the bridge when the Kaltorians attacked, and the explosions were monstrous. Fireballs devoured everything within a 10-meter radius. By the end of the second day, we held on by sheer stubbornness, stims from the medical kits, and hatred for everything trying to kill us. I barely remember the third day. Everything blurred into one endless nightmare of thunder, screams, the smell of burnt flesh and blood. We hadn't slept in 72 hours. I was out of ammo for every weapon, even the captured ones. I fought with a knife, a rifle stock, my bare hands. Private Makayev blew himself up along with a dozen Kaltorians using his last grenade when they breached our side of the bridge. Corporal Krylov, the one who mutated from predator blood, fought like an animal, tearing throats with his hands, biting, scratching out eyes, and the Kaltorians feared him more than fire. Out of 23 men, 8 remained by the end of the third day, including me. We stood on a barricade of corpses, ours, Kaltorian, Reaper, and I no longer knew if I was dead or alive. And then we intercepted a transmission from the Kaltorian commander. He was screaming into the radio at his superiors, his voice trembling not with anger, but with sheer terror. He yelled that the humans on the bridge wouldn't die, that they kept fighting even when wounded, that they didn't know when to die, that they weren't soldiers but damned killing machines. He demanded to withdraw his troops because he was losing men by the hundreds, and the bridge was still not taken. I heard it, looked at my bloodied, wounded, half-mad fighters, and understood. We had won. Not because we were stronger, but because we were willing to pay more. And the Kaltorians understood that. They retreated on the fourth day. We held the bridge, but the price was so high that I still see the faces of those who stayed there in Bloody Canyon, where the river flows red forever. After Bloody Canyon, I was sent to the field hospital because I had a jagged wound on my leg that had started to fester, and the medic said if it wasn't treated properly, I'd lose the limb. The hospital was located in a cave blasted out of the rock, far from the jungle and its toxins. Inside, it was stuffy, smelling of blood, pus, and antiseptic. The walls were wet with condensation, and the lighting came from dim field lamps because the generators were running at their limit. There were so many wounded that they lay right on the floor on stretched-out ponchos, and the medical staff simply couldn't keep up with treating everyone. I waited my turn for 3 hours, sitting among the groans, screams, and that specific scent of dying men. When they finally called me, I saw Dr. Sokolova, a woman in her 40s with streaks of gray in her hair, sunken eyes, and hands trembling from exhaustion. She examined my leg, said the infection was deep, and she needed a cut. I asked about anesthesia. She looked at me as if I were an idiot and said, "Anesthesia ran out 2 weeks ago, as did most medications, and if I wanted to live, I would have to endure it." I was given a wooden stick to bite on. 2 orderlies pinned me to the table, and Sokolova started cutting. I screamed, blacked out, came to, and the pain was so intense I prayed for death. When it was over, I lay on the floor in the corner of the cave, shaking from shock, and watched Sokolova continue working. In 1 hour, she amputated 3 arms and 1 leg, without anesthesia, with minimal antiseptic, quickly and crudely, because there was no other way. Soldiers screamed, writhed. One lost consciousness and never woke up. His heart couldn't take it. But those who survived received a stimulant injection, a bandage, and were sent back to the line a day or 2 later. I saw a fighter missing his left arm who returned to his platoon the very next morning, learned to shoot one-handed, and kept fighting. It was insane, but it was the reality of carnage. We had no time for recovery, no resources for proper treatment, and you either returned to the fight or you died because no one would protect you in the rear. Sokolova worked 20 hours a day, slept in brief snatches right on the operating table, and I saw her cry when she thought no one was looking. She cut, stitched, amputated, and saved lives, but she knew most of her patients would die anyway. Not from their wounds, but on the battlefield they would return to tomorrow. This wasn't healing. It was a factory for processing people into expendable material. But the wounds were not the worst part. The worst was the ward for those Carnage had broken not physically, but psychologically. Lying there were soldiers who had simply ceased to function. Some stared into a single spot for hours, unresponsive to anything. Others thrashed in seizures, screaming from hallucinations, and still others tried to kill themselves at every opportunity. I saw Corporal Yermakov, who had spent 3 weeks surrounded with his squad without supplies. When they were found, 2 were alive, including him, and they had eaten the corpses of their comrades to avoid starvation. Yermakov didn't speak. He just sat staring at the wall, and sometimes he would vomit. Command tried to conceal such incidents, but rumors spread. Tales of entire platoons that had cannibalized each other in the jungle, of soldiers who shot themselves in the head right on post, of those who went mad from spores, toxins, or simply from the sheer inability to endure what they had seen. Military psychologists tried to work with them, but there was no time for therapy on Carnage. You were either pumped with tranquilizers and sent back, or written off and left to die in that cave. I spoke with one of the psychologists, Major Levin, and he told me plainly, every second soldier on Carnage has PTSD, every fifth is on the verge of psychosis, and we are all slowly losing our minds. It's just that for some, it happens faster. And then, a war correspondent arrived at the hospital, a civilian named Dmitry Osokin, with a camera and an idealistic view of war. Command allowed him to film for propaganda, thinking he would showcase heroes and victories. But Osokin filmed the truth. He filmed Sokolova amputating a soldier's leg while he chewed on a stick and bled. He filmed soldiers with stumps returning to the line. He filmed those who had gone mad lying in the corner of the hospital and orderlies carrying out corpses and stacking them because there was no time for burial. He filmed everything, the suffering, the madness, the price we were paying for every meter of this damn planet. Command tried to confiscate the footage, threatened Osokin with a tribunal, but he managed to transmit the recordings via satellite link to journalists on Earth. The material aired, and I later heard that half the galaxy was in shock, seeing what the war on Carnage had become. It was expected that support would drop, that people would demand the evacuation of troops. But the opposite happened. Support soared. People saw the price we were paying, and instead of horror, they felt fury and resolve. The messages from all human colonies were the same. Do not retreat. Win at any cost. Show the galaxy that humanity cannot be broken. I lay in that hospital with an infected leg and a broken mind, and I understood. We cannot be stopped. We are ready to pay any price, and that is the most terrifying thing. After 4 months of the meat grinder, the Kaltorians did something no one expected. They stopped fighting and started thinking. Zarket, their commander, turned out to be not just a soldier, but a strategist who understood that a war of attrition under Carnage's conditions would kill both sides long before anyone won. He ordered his forces to retreat toward the planet's equator, where the jungle was sparser, the toxins weaker, and the predators less aggressive. There, the Kaltorians dug in, built fortifications from local stone and imported materials, creating a true fortress with multi-layered defenses, minefields, artillery positions, and energy barriers. They settled into a defensive stance and stopped attacking. Instead, Zarket reached out again, and this time his proposal was so reasonable that even our officers considered it. He stated that the Kaltorians controlled the southern Carnadite deposits, the humans controlled the northern ones, and instead of killing each other over the central deposit, they could simply split it in half. 50-50. Both sides get resources, both sides survive, the war ends, and we all leave this planet alive. It was logical, rational, and I, lying in a trench with a festering leg, thought it was the best offer we could get. But I underestimated human stubbornness and the pride of our command. Admiral Zhao replied within 24 hours, and his answer was brief: refusal. No compromise, no division of territory, only the coalition's complete surrender or war to the last man. Zhao declared that humanity does not share victory, that we came to Carnage to take everything, and the Kaltorians could either leave on their own or be removed by force. Command gave the order to advance on the equatorial fortifications, and a new phase of the war began. 3 months of continuous assaults on positions that were practically impregnable. I returned to duty a week after the hospital, limping, with a stick instead of a crutch, and I was thrown back into the attack. The Kaltorians had turned the equator into a death zone. The approaches to their fortifications were mined, swept by fire from a dozen firing points, covered by artillery, and every attack turned into a slaughter. We advanced in waves, 100 men at a time, and I watched the first line fall to mines, the second to machine guns, and the third break through to the wire, only to perish from grenades and flamethrowers. The Kaltorians fought professionally, coldly, without panic, and they killed us by the dozens for every 100 meters gained. But we kept advancing, attack after attack, day after day, and the corpses in front of their fortifications literally grew into mountains. In the first month of the assaults, we lost 2 divisions and advanced 1 kilometer. The second month, another 1.5 divisions and another half kilometer. The Kaltorians held fast, their defense did not break, and every meter of ground was soaked with our blood. I participated in 17 attacks, was wounded 4 times, saw hundreds of fighters die beside me, and with each passing day, I understood that this was suicide, that we were throwing ourselves at the fortifications like waves crashing against rocks, breaking and receding. But the orders were relentless: advance, press the attack, do not stop. The Kaltorians also suffered losses. Their artillery ran dry, their ammunition dwindled, but they held on because defending is easier than attacking. In the 7th week, I intercepted a transmission from Zarket. He was shouting at his military council, and his voice held not anger, but despair mixed with bewilderment. He said that humans attacked even when the attack was pointless, that they were dying by the thousands for mere meters of ground, that the offer to divide the resources was still on the table, but the humans ignored it. He said a phrase I will never forget. They prefer death to compromise. These are not warriors, these are madmen, and fighting them means fighting a force of nature that does not know the word retreat. I listened and knew he was right. We were madmen. But that madness was our weapon. By the end of the 3rd month, we had breached the Kaltorians' first line of defense at the cost of 3 divisions. Of my platoon, which started the war with 30 fighters, only myself and 4 others remained. Everyone else was either dead or so mutilated that they were discharged. I stood on the ruins of a Kaltorian bunker amidst corpses, craters, and smoke, and looked at the second line of fortifications looming a kilometer away. I knew we would be thrown at it tomorrow. I knew most of us wouldn't return. But an order is an order, and we would go because we don't know how to stop. The Kaltorians began to understand who they were fighting, not an army, but a species that fundamentally refuses defeat. Zarket sent one final message to his command, which we also intercepted. He asked permission to withdraw from the planet because holding positions against humans was impossible, not due to our strength, but due to our infinite willingness to die. The coalition refused him, ordering him to hold out to the end. But I saw how the Kaltorian soldiers looked at us during the rare lulls between attacks. Their eyes held not anger, but fear. They were afraid not because we were stronger. They were afraid because we wouldn't stop, even if it cost us every last man. And they were right. I was made captain not for merit, but because everyone ranked above me had died. Major Krechetov was burned alive in a disabled APC, 2 lieutenants from staff were killed by a mine, and Senior Sergeant Volkov took a bullet to the head during the last assault. 210 men remained of what was once a battalion of 1,200, and someone had to command them. They gave me the captain's insignia right in the trench without ceremony and an order: seize Zarket's command bunker at any cost, because intelligence had located it deep within the Kaltorian defenses. It was a kamikaze raid: break through 3 lines of fortifications, minefields, firing points, and reach the bunker, knowing there would be no way back. I gathered everyone who could still hold a weapon and explained the plan. No one objected. We all understood we were going to die, but on Carnage, that no longer mattered. Death had become the norm, life the exception. And if we were going to die, we might as well do it for a purpose. We left at night, through the jungle, bypassing the main positions, using the toxic fog for cover, and the planet helped us, as if acknowledging us as its own. The predators didn't touch us. We smelled of Carnage, wore its fungal armor, and its blood ran in our veins. We had become part of this world, and it accepted us. We passed the first line of defense stealthily, slitting the sentries' throats. The second line had to be taken by storm: explosives made from local flora, flamethrowers, hand-to-hand fighting in the trenches. By the time we breached the third line, only 63 men remained out of 210. The Kaltorians realized what was happening, raised the alarm, and a barrage of fire fell on us from all sides. We ran through a minefield, losing men with every step, sheltered behind our comrades' corpses, crawled through mud and blood, and I don't remember how many times I was wounded that night. Shrapnel in my hip, a bullet in my shoulder, a grenade took off 2 fingers on my left hand. But I kept moving, because if I stopped, everyone else would stop, and we would all die here for nothing. Zarket's bunker was dug into the rock, covered by an energy shield and a dozen heavy armored guards. We threw all our remaining explosives at the shield, overloading it, and when it collapsed, we stormed inside. The guards met us with plasma fire, and I saw Mikhaev vaporized by a direct hit, Krylov throw himself at a Kaltorian with a knife and tear his throat out, and Private Osipov detonate a grenade, embracing 2 enemies. We took the bunker in 10 minutes. Out of 210 men, 11 remained, including me. I had lost an eye to shrapnel and my left arm below the elbow to a plasma burn. But we took Zarket alive. The Kaltorian commander sat in his command chair, surrounded by dead bodyguards, and looked at us. 11 bloody, mutilated, half-mad humans who had just clawed through hell to reach him. He did not resist when we tied him up, nor did he try to escape. He just watched, and his eyes held something between respect and horror. I ordered the bunker held until reinforcements arrived, and we secured the position, knowing the Kaltorians would try to take back their commander. They attacked twice. We repelled both assaults, losing 4 more men. By dawn, there were 7 of us left when our troops arrived. Zarket was taken to HQ for interrogation, and I was summoned there too, because I captured him, and command wanted a report. In the staff tent, Zarket sat at a table, bound but maintaining his dignity, and looked at the map of Carnage, where red markers denoted our losses. Over 1 million human dead in 8 months of war. He looked at me, a one-eyed cripple with a stump instead of a hand, and asked in broken standard human why. Why we kept going, why we didn't accept his offer to divide the resources, why we were paying such a price for a lump of ore. He asked if our species was so greedy that we would trade 1 million lives for carnadite. I looked into his eyes, those cold, reptilian eyes filled with logic and reason, and realized he would never understand. For him, war was calculation, an analysis of gains and losses, a rational decision about when to fight and when to retreat. But for us, war is something else. I told him the truth, which I didn't fully understand myself, but felt with every fiber of my wounded, scarred body. We are not fighting for the ore. Carnadite is just an excuse, a goal they gave us, but that's not the point. We fight because we don't know how to lose, because in our history there were hundreds of wars where we should have surrendered, but we didn't, because when we are cornered, we don't look for compromise. We sink our teeth into the enemy's throat and drag them into the grave with us. I told him that the Kaltorians fight as long as it's reasonable, while we fight as long as we are alive. That you calculate losses and retreat when the count is not in your favor. But we simply don't know the word retreat. Zarket was silent for a long time, looking at me, and I saw the hope for understanding fade in his eyes. He whispered something in his own language. The translator said it meant madness. I nodded. Yes, madness. But it is our madness, and it makes us invincible. Not because we are stronger, but because we are willing to pay more. Any price. Absolutely any price. Zarket understood this, and I saw something break in him. He realized that the coalition had lost not tactically, but ideologically. They fight to win. We fight not to lose. And that is the fundamental difference. I thought I had seen everything Carnage had to offer. Toxic jungles, tank-sized predators, three-front war. But in the 9th month, the planet showed us we understood nothing at all. It began with a tremor. At first slight, almost imperceptible, the ground seemed to breathe beneath our feet. And then the shaking intensified until it was impossible to stand. I was commanding the remnants of my company, just 42 men out of 300, holding a ridge above one of the deposits when the sky on the horizon burst into red. 3 volcanoes, considered dormant, woke up simultaneously, spewing columns of ash and lava into the poisonous sky. The ground split open, and steam and gases that killed instantly erupted from the fissures. I saw 2 of my men drop dead just by inhaling that air. The radio crackled with shouts from every position, seismic activity across the planet, eruptions, ground collapses, entire bases sinking underground in minutes. Carnage was waking up, and it was angry. And then they began to crawl out from underground, mega-predators, creatures the size of our ships, which had slept for thousands of years in the planet's depths and were now surfacing. I saw the first one at dawn. It burst through the ground 2 kilometers from our position, and the earth buckled as if from a tactical blast. The creature was about 100 meters long, covered in armored plates, with dozens of limbs and a maw large enough for a tank to drive into. It moved slowly, but everything in its path simply ceased to exist. Trees, rocks, fortifications, everything was crushed and devoured. I gave the order to retreat because fighting this was impossible, but where do you retreat when the planet is crumbling beneath your feet? The Kaltorians faced the same thing. Their southern fortifications were destroyed by a series of earthquakes, and one of the mega-predators walked right through their main base, killing thousands in an hour. Over intercepted transmissions, I heard the panic in their ranks. Zarket was screaming at his command, demanding evacuation, saying the war was over, that both sides had lost to Carnage. The coalition began evacuation on the 2nd day after the planet awoke. Their fleet was still holding orbit, ships descended, picked up troops, and I watched Kaltorian transports one by one climb into the sky, breaking through the toxic clouds and ash. Some of their soldiers didn't make it. They were abandoned, left to die, and I saw them running toward the evacuation zones, but the mega-predators overtook them faster. And then a message came over our comms from headquarters, and I couldn't believe what I heard. The human fleet had been destroyed a month ago in an orbital battle. They had kept silent about it to avoid demoralizing the troops. There would be no reinforcements. There would be no evacuation. 400,000 humans were staying on Carnage forever. I relayed this to my men, and they stood in silence, staring at the ground, realizing we were all dead men still walking. But the strangest thing was that no one ran, no one broke. We kept fighting, no longer against the Kaltorians, but against the planet itself, because if we were going to die, it wouldn't be for nothing. The following weeks turned into a fight for survival, where every day was a miracle. We retreated from eruptions, hid from mega-predators in caves, drank contaminated water, and ate the meat of killed creatures because our supplies were exhausted. Communication between units was constantly breaking down. Some died from lava, others fell into fissures. and still others simply disappeared into the jungles. I led my company east, where rumors placed a zone of relative stability, and of the 42 men, 17 made it. We met the remnants of other units, exhausted, hungry, semi-mad men who still held their weapons and still refused to surrender. Someone suggested raising a white flag to Carnage, surrendering to the planet, and he was beaten half to death by his own comrades. We do not surrender. Even here, on the brink of annihilation, when all logic dictates that the end is near, we kept fighting, because it was the only thing we had left: stubbornness and hatred for everything that tried to kill us. When their ships appeared over Carnage 2 years later, I stood on the edge of a cliff and watched the drop pods cut through the toxic sky, the same kind we had arrived in once, an eternity ago. The Alliance expedition came to look for bones, count casualties, maybe erect a monument to 400,000 dead. They expected to find ruins, corpses, silence. Instead, they were met by me and my people, 40,000 survivors, whom the planet failed to kill because we had become a part of it. My body was covered in fungal armor that had grown into my skin so deeply that I no longer knew where I ended and Carnage began. My left arm, the stump left after the plasma burn, had regrown with symbiotic tissues and transformed into something functional but non-human. The eye I lost in battle was replaced by something else. I could see in the dark, distinguish heat signatures, but the mirror showed a monster. We had all become monsters, but we survived. The expedition landed cautiously, weapons ready, expecting hostility or madness, but we met them calmly, almost indifferently, because after 2 years on Carnage, nothing could surprise or scare us anymore. The officer leading the expedition, a colonel in a clean uniform and a look of shock on his face, couldn't believe what he saw. We had built settlements in the jungle from local stone and living trees that grew according to our designs, forming walls and roofs. We had domesticated the predators, the same 6-legged creatures that killed us in the first months. Now they guarded our territories, carried cargo, even allowed us to ride them, because we smelled of Carnage and they accepted us as their own. We controlled the Carnadite deposits, mining the ore with primitive tools but methodically, organized, creating a semblance of civilization in this hell. The colonel asked me how we survived, and I didn't know how to answer because I didn't fully understand it myself. Maybe stubbornness, maybe madness, or maybe the planet simply got tired of killing us and decided to accept us. They brought medics, psychologists, and rehabilitation specialists, intending to take us home, return us to a normal life, but most refused to leave. Carnage had become our home in a strange, brutal way, and we couldn't imagine being anywhere else. I agreed to meet with the Alliance Command for only one reason: to hand over what we came for. We loaded 20 tons of Carnadite into the cargo bay of their flagship, or extracted through the blood, death, and mutation of 400,000 people. The Admiral, Zhao himself, the man who refused the truce and sent us all to die, flew in person to receive the cargo. He looked at me, covered in fungal armor, with an inhuman eye, with limbs that were something between human and Carnage. And I saw in his gaze a mixture of triumph and horror. I handed him the containers of ore and spoke only 3 words, the words he had demanded to hear 9 months ago. Mission accomplished. Planet taken. Zhao nodded, turned, and left, without asking a single question, because the answers were written on our bodies and in our eyes. When their ships left, leaving behind supplies and a promise to return, I stood on the same cliff and thought about what we had proven to the galaxy. The Kaltorians were stronger technologically, smarter tactically, more rational strategically. But they lost because they retreated when logic told them to. Carnage was deadlier than any enemy that could exist, but we defeated it not by the strength of our weapons, but by our willingness to turn into anything, to pay anything, just not to lose. Humans don't win wars because we are the smartest or the most technologically advanced. We win because we have no limit to what we are willing to endure for victory. Absolutely no limit. We will sacrifice our bodies, our minds, our humanity, our lives, and stand on the bones of our brothers. But we will not retreat. That is what makes us the most dangerous creatures in space. Not because we are strong, but because we do not know the word enough. We do not understand the concept of a rational retreat, and we would rather all die to the last man than admit defeat. Carnage understood this. The Kaltorians understood this. Now, the whole galaxy will understand this.